good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to a very special U.S.-China Education Trust program celebrating the 10th anniversary of our Asian American Authors Series. I'm Julia Chang Block, founder and executive chair of USET, and I have the honor and double pleasure of hosting acclaimed award-winning author GISH JEN, who just happens to have also launched this series 10 years ago. GISH, it's wonderful to have you back to participate in this conversation to celebrate our 10th anniversary. USET launched this Asian American author series because we wanted to raise the voice and visibility of Asian Americans and promote their reach. Asian American authors were not getting their due in opportunities or recognition, and USET wanted to give these authors, like you, a platform, not that you need it, a platform at least to showcase their talent and share it with audiences on both sides of the Pacific. 10 years later, America's literary landscape looks quite different, and the last few years have witnessed a rise of Asian American writing winning top literary prizes, including the Pulitzer and the National Book Award. Now, GISH, you had a lot to do with all that, and you have won too many awards to mention. Still, many may not know your prolific body of work. Let me first familiarize everyone with your books so we could enjoy a richer conversation. I read your first novel, Typical American, when it came out in 1991 and became an instant fan. As a Chinese immigrant myself, I found the trials, tribulations, and triumphs you assigned to the book's Chang family, my surname also, chasing the American dream to be funny, insightful, and real. The Los Angeles Times book review said it right. And I quote, "GISH JEN has done much more than tell an immigrant story. She has done it more and in some ways better than it has ever been done before." I also remember, I wonder if you do too, traveling to Shanghai, Nanjing, and Beijing together in 2012, and how you held your audiences, whether students or scholars, writers, readers, or the public, with the power of what you had written in World and Town, then your latest novel. This story of a Chinese American widow and her Cambodian refugee neighbors raised, I thought, profound questions about home, religion, America, what love is, and what every immigrant searches for: identity and acceptance, a theme of many of your books. Altogether, your body of work now includes 5 novels. In addition to the 2 already mentioned, we have Mona in the Promised Land, The Love Wife, and The Resistors, a near future dystopian novel. You have also written 2 nonfiction works, the first of which, Tiger Writing, Art, Culture, and the Interdependent Self, came out of a trilogy of lectures you gave as part of the Harvard's William Massey Lectures in American Studies. The Girl in Her Baggage Claim, which followed, further explored how your writing was influenced by the different ways people from the East and West tell their own stories. It's different. I wonder what your favorite genre is. You've written so many. We will find out later in our conversation. Is it your short work because you are a master of the short story form? Your short stories can be found in the New Yorker and dozens of other periodicals, anthologies, and textbooks. They've been selected for the best American short stories 5 times, including the best American short stories of the century. We have the good fortune to be discussing your latest collection of 11 short stories, Thank You, Mr. Nixon, just published early this year. It's time now to hear from you, Gish, a second-generation Chinese American, born in Long Island, brought up in Yonkers and Scarsdale, educated at Harvard, Stanford, and the Iowa Writers' Workshop, and recognized as one of the most important writers in America today. Gish, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Julie. After an introduction like that, I feel like, oh, we should just end it there. But I thought I would read a little bit since we were just talking before this, so that maybe I would read a little, and then we can talk about my new book. It is Thank You, Mr. Nixon. It is about it's a series of stories, as Julia was saying, but it also, it recounts really the 50 years since the opening of China, as a subject I think that will be of interest to all of your audience members. And so it starts in 1972 with Richard Nixon's visit to China, and it ends in 2022, and with COVID. And I just thought I'd read from this first story. This first story is a letter that is being written by a young Chinese girl. She is in heaven, and she is writing to Richard Nixon, who is in hell. She doesn't think that Richard Nixon deserves really to have been treated as badly as he was. But anyway, but here she is talking about his whole experience in China. Really, the whole China you saw was a tailor-made China, a Potemkin China, you might say. Not that anyone would have said that then. That is only how we talk in heaven, where we know all kinds of things. For example, today, we know that today there are still a lot of things you cannot say in China, but back then there were even more. And while today you had to guess what you couldn't say, back then they would just tell you. No one was allowed to shout, "Down with the American imperialists," to your face. On the radio and TV too, the phrase American imperialists just disappeared, as if everyone forgot it all at once, which no one thought was particularly strange. We all knew how to forget, after all. We were good at it. Experts, you might say. The streets were cleaned before you came, with certain slogans removed and new ones put up. The shelves of the stores were filled, and people were made to stay at work, or was made to stay at school and at work late, so that streets would not be so crowded. Did you notice how few people there were around? Maybe you thought that was normal, but it was not normal. Just like the number of fish in West Lake was not normal. Did you think there were always so many beautiful carp waiting to be fed? Those of us students who were supposed to be background students in the park were told what to understand. What if the American journalists asked things like, "Do you have enough to eat and drink?" or "Do you like America?" Our teacher asked us. Do you understand them? Of course, that was a stupid question, because anyone who answered yes would not have been picked to be a background student to begin with. But no one said it was stupid. Instead, we promised that even if the translator spoke perfect Mandarin, we would not understand him. We were not supposed to understand anything about a man going to the moon either, which was easy, since most of us did not actually know the American imperialists had put a man on the moon until we were told. We didn't know anything about it. As for whether we were supposed to volunteer, we had gangs of Red Guards breaking into our homes and destroying everything, much less they took people out of the yard and beat them to death. Well, you may guess whether we were supposed to say these things or not. No, we were smart. And having been told to be neither humble nor arrogant, neither cold nor hot, we're exactly that. Although I was so happy in my new coat, it was hard to me not to be warm with happiness. Indeed, I thought it was the most beautiful coat in the world, until I saw your wife's red coat. Can I call her Pat, now that we're all dead? She did not wear her red coat to the park. That was a disappointment. At the park, she wore a fur coat, maybe because it was too cold. But I saw the red coat later. And anyway, we students all knew about the red coat. It was already a famous coat. Of course, we understood too very well that we did not love it. Though China had become a sea of dark blue and gray and black, with just a little color allowed for us children, for everyone else a red coat was bourgeois after all. It was anti-revolutionary. It was corrupt and corrupting. Couldn't we feel its pull? That was because it was venal, imperialist, American. Beautiful. No, we did not love it. We did not think how suitable it was that a beautiful coat came from a country whose name in Chinese literally meant beautiful. A beautiful country full of beautiful coats. What could that be but evil? And I'll stop there.
Gish, I'm so glad you read from that passage, because I love the fact that you opened this book with that cheery letter from that little girl. And where did you get the inspiration for that? I mean, I really wonder how you could have even come up with it. My imagination would not have even thought of it.
Well, my imagination can't help but think of these things, Julia. So we're very different that way.
That's why you're an acclaimed writer.
Yeah, well, so anyway, just like everybody else, of course, I knew about Richard Nixon's visit, and I had seen those pictures, from Hangzhou when he went to the West Lake. And I'd seen, there's a very, very famous picture, of course, a little girl shaking his hand. And of course, that little girl is probably alive now, so I didn't want to write about her, because people in China can't sue you because you put them in your books. And nonetheless, she's an actual person. So I made up another little girl, right? So another little girl who's also wearing a beautiful coat, just like the one in the picture. But a lot of the sentiments that she expresses, my made up girl, of course, were the sentiments of the time. And as you know, the Chinese people, they were fascinated by Richard Nixon, of course, but they were really fascinated by Pat Nixon's red coat. That red coat was just, it was such a powerful symbol of what American had that they were not supposed to want. But
I remember that red coat.
Right. Everybody remembers that red coat. And of course, that red coat, I think is the seed of everything that we see in China today. So, so I guess it's to sort of say I wrote about it because it was just in my imagination. But also, I am writing a book that's supposed to help people think about this last 50 years and what's happened. And I do think that when you look at people's reaction to the red coat, you can kind of see how China, yes, would embrace capitalism. And, a lot of what we saw after the visit was in one way very surprising, but in another way, not at all surprising, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, since we've started with passages from the book, I have always found that every one of your book has some humor in it. And I've always wondered where you got this humor. I want to read you two, not passages, but two sentences from your book that I just thought was so funny. The first one comes from Lulu Ku, the girlfriend. And she says, "Why do Americans like to walk around in the woods with mosquitoes?" I couldn't help but laugh because I know so many Asian girls who, if they're not saying it, they're certainly thinking it. Right? Okay, that's the first one. The other one was one of the sisters, Betty Koo, who has to reassess her mother's philosophy. No politics, just make money. I couldn't help but laugh again because I've heard my mother's friends say that over and over again, especially to their sons. So where did all this come from? Did it come from somewhere that you heard somebody say this, or did it come out of your imagination?
Well, just like you, it's not like I can remember a time when my mother said such a thing or a relative said such a thing, but clearly the stuff is in the air, right? Clearly it's what people think. And, and it's interesting that, I think that people laugh at it for different reasons. Hopefully it's all, I never like humor, which is mean, so it's never mean. But I think that your laughter is a little bit, is the laughter of recognition. It's the laughter of recognition crossed with a laughter that recognizes that you're not supposed to say these things, So I think we both have one foot in each culture. In one culture where they definitely say these things, and another culture where you're not supposed to say these things. And I think that you and I laugh because we're in between. And we both know that everybody says this and that you're not supposed to say it. And that makes us laugh. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's just there's a recognition there.
There is a recognition there, yes,
of what it means to be in the middle, you know.
But it also illustrates the differences between the Chinese and Americans.
Yeah. You know, it's not there to make a point. I mean, I'm not trying to make a point, but it makes a point by itself, because the things that we laugh at, all of them speak to something, you know, some, you know, gap that you and I, you know, stand astride, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, and like I say, so it's like, it's not like I have to say, oh, what are the cultural differences between the Chinese and Americans? You know, if I start to laugh, there is a difference, you know. And it's interesting. I mean, it's almost like I use, you know, my own, you know, impulse to laugh as a little, you remember those metal detectors that people would use on the beach, you know,
yes.
They're going around looking for a piece of metal on the sand, and they have this thing, you know. But, you know, for me, humor is a bit like that thing, you know. So basically, if I laugh, there's something there. So it is both entertaining, and that, you know, people laugh, and that's a good thing. And also it will be something that finally makes people think, you know, and so it will make them, you know, hopefully it will provoke, you know, conversation and understanding.
You also have a way, I mean, you can tell that I'm a fan. And so I've read several of your books, but that you have a way of bringing back your old characters and weaving them into your new stories. And you sort of seamlessly reconnect them. And, you know, over decades, over years, as well as spanning the globe. I mean, like in this book, the characters are in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Vancouver, New York, and so on. But how do you juggle all this and keep them straight?
Well, in truth, I don't think I keep them all straight myself. I mean, my husband definitely helps. And in this this collection, we definitely had to have the spreadsheet, because there were so many dates, and there were
exactly.
And I'm not very good at that.
You sort of match them with events that happened.
Yeah, well, you know, I had to ask my husband to make a spreadsheet because I was getting a little confused. But in terms of they're just coming back, I think that, you know, again, you know, they come back, and the way that they come back in kind of unexpected ways, right? So, you know, you see them in one story, and and they come up again as someone's lawyer in another story, right? Or something like that. You know, it's not straightforward. But I have to say that to me, is just reflective of how my life is. In other words, to me, that's exactly how you know people, you know, because we do live, you know, belong to a diasporic community, and we live in a highly mobile society, and that's exactly the way you know people. You know, you played soccer with them when you were in high school, and then you don't see them for another 20 years, and then lo and behold, you know, there they are in the next apartment over in Beijing, you know. And I just think that sort of there's a way in which life is just like that. And so there is a way in which I feel like my books are just reflecting my lived experience, which is that people just kind of pop up, and then they are again. Do you know what I mean? In very, very different circumstances, I will say. And that's been going on.
How do you choose who you're going to revive, so to speak?
Well, you know, choose is a funny word, Julie. You know, for me, they're just alive.
They're all alive?
Well, in my imagination, yeah.
Okay.
I don't really. I mean, it's not like I dream about them every day. But I mean, if I think, you know, Betty Koo, I might think, well, how is Betty Koo doing? Do you know what I mean? And I write another story, and there she is. So I don't, you know. But choosing is a funny, you know. I don't think. I mean, there's some choosing involved. I mean, in this case, you know, I am trying to capture an era. You know, you can't possibly, no one could possibly capture this era in any kind of exhaustive way. I mean, and in fact, I felt, you know, when I had this idea about trying to capture the 50 years since Nixon's visit, you know, I really thought, you know, it would be an incredible mistake to try to do a novel, because you know, the whole idea that you were trying to do something and suggesting that it was somehow complete is just, you know, that is a fool's errand. So, you know, it seemed to me that it was very important to suggest that, you know, we see this one and we see this one, but there's a lot you don't know. And the whole idea of there being a lot you don't know, it seems to me a very important part of the picture. And the fact of the matter is, as you know, in in life, really, but especially when it comes to US-China things, there's, you can only suggest and you can suggest and pick some points that give you some idea of the trajectory, but you cannot make a claim to have captured everything. Too many people.
When did you decide?
So that's why I look, but I do look for kind of a spread of people. Okay. I mean, in other words, so
you sure did. I couldn't keep up. But when did you decide to do this book? You said that because tell us about the timeline a bit. How does this book fit in with the rest of your body of work?
Well, it's a very different book. In some ways, all my books are related to the other ones, but very different. You know what I mean?
Very different.
So this was, again, very different. But so a lot of the stories, I had just written just for fun over the years. And during COVID, I sat down and I looked at them and I suddenly realized, like, oh my God, you can see all the changes, like in the US, as a result of China having opened. You can see the changes in the background. We have students in our classrooms that we didn't used to have before. Do you know what I mean? We have problems in our classroom that we didn't used to have before. We have, many people are doing businesses that they didn't used to be able to do. They have problems with their businesses that they didn't used to have. And I could sort of see that all that stuff, was in the background. I mean, we didn't used to have problems with, Chinese investors having lobbies and needing art for their lobbies. That is just not something that used to go on. And I looked at my stories and I thought, oh my God, you can really see history just moving in the background. And then I thought, oh my God, we have the 50th anniversary coming up. And I really just need some stories, and then we could have a complete trajectory that I thought was really important. I mean, I think it was an important moment to look back on kind of where we started and how this all happened. And I mean, when I say a couple of stories, I mean, it was 5 more stories, and some of which are quite long. It's actually still a lot of work. I do think that maybe if it weren't for COVID, I don't know whether I would have had the quiet, just kind of sit down and really, write the stories. Some of the stories were written, I don't want to say to order, but they had to fit certain criteria. So it's not usually I say a writer, a story could be anything. But, that last story, I mean, I had to write it, I had to use all the, there's a way in which it had to be both freestanding and also to tie up all the strands that had come before it. It's tricky. So I'm not sure that without the quiet of COVID that I would have had quite the concentration that I needed, to do it. But because quiet, COVID, it was quiet. I'm sitting here in a cabin, it's cold here in Vermont. It's 10 below day after day after day, and you know what I mean. And the COVID is going on and on and on. And of course, that was terrible, but it was good for my work. It was because it was just so quiet. And so
we have COVID to thank for this book, right?
Yeah, I do think so.
Let's come into reality a bit.
Okay.
How did Nixon's historic visit impact your life? You've written about so many other people, how it affected them.
Yeah. Well, let me just sort of say, like, very happily for me, by the way, the 50 years since the opening of China more or less coincided with my career, because, I went to Iowa in 1981. Is when I went to Iowa to graduate school. So you can sort of see, very happily for me, it's sort of coincidental. And I don't know if Nixon hadn't gone to China, and if I therefore didn't go to China, I think that I would never have even happened on what has turned out to be my great subject, which is cultural difference. And if you know what I mean, in other words, I don't think I would have even really been able to have the experiences that enabled me to kind of reach the kind of understanding that I have. And how would I do that if I couldn't go to China? Do you know what I mean? So to just start right there. And of course, for my family personally, this whole business of, finally being able to meet all your relatives. And I mean, for families like mine, it was huge. I mean, my parents were stuck in America and hadn't seen anybody in 40 years. And all of a sudden, and for me, all these figures that, had been like mythic figures, they were just, there were names I'd heard, but, they didn't seem like real people. And all of a sudden there they were real people, and they got, you know what I mean? Their feet got cold in the winter, and they were real people. And so that was really, and obviously, I mean, for me, certainly as a person, of course, this was an amazing thing. It completely changes your idea of yourself and your family. And I will say of politics, I mean, I think that, it just makes you realize that, it seems like all this stuff is happening upstairs and it's so far, far away from you. And you realize that actually these things that they, some guy, Richard Nixon wakes up one morning and says, I think I'll go to China, you know what I mean? And then, the life, just not my life, but lives in millions and millions and millions of people, billions of people, let's be accurate, has changed just like that. I mean, it really is an extraordinary thing to kind of really understand. Of course, the time this is happening, I'm in my 20s. I read the newspaper, but I have no idea really of just how consequential these decisions, these politicians' decisions, just how consequential they are. And like I say, it's, just in terms of what you study, who's there, who's in your classroom, everything, everything. And, and as I wanted to capture some of that sense of, the way that, like the lives of all these people in my book, every single one of them has had their life transformed as my life was.
As I recall, your mother's from Shanghai. Your mother's from Shanghai, yeah. And your father's from Yixing, the place where the great pots, teapots are made. Do you you mentioned lots and lots and lots of, I guess, relatives.
Yeah.
Are they still there, and do you now keep in touch? What are they doing?
Well, I have a lot of a lot of relatives, especially in Shanghai, because my mother's family mostly didn't leave. So most of my mother's relatives are there. All my aunties are there, lots of cousins. Some of the cousins are here now, but most of my aunties are all there. And then on my father's side, most of them have left Yixing, because they went with the nationalists to Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And but I still have relatives there too. But my relatives in Yixing are not as close, I will say. I mean, if I go there, I definitely see them. And my grandparents, my father's parents, and of course all the other ancestors are buried there. So it's still a very important place for our family. But yes, no, I go back and I see them. So we went from a family that had barely any relatives to a family with like a lot of relatives. So that was a very big change there. But sure, of course, I keep in touch.
Do they provide inspiration to you when you're developing your characters? Because nearly all protagonists in your books are Asian or Asian Americans. Is there some reason for that?
Well, no. I mean, first of all, I definitely have a lot of Caucasian American characters are everywhere, right? And if you think of a book like More in the Promised Land, actually,
Jewish.
They're mostly Jewish from New York, and so the Asian Americans are actually a minority. In that book. So it's not like everybody is Asian or Asian American. That said, I have to say that early on in my career, I did decide that even if I was writing about art, say, that, why not use Asian American characters? I mean, I think the whole idea that as soon as you see an Asian American character, it's got to be about certain things. It's got to be about food. It's got to be about family. I mean, I thought that was really very unfortunate. And I was in a position to write about art and use Asian American characters to do it. And so I just, so that was, I guess it's kind of a political thing, I just felt like, that we had been pigeonholed basically. And to me, I feel like, well, that's just not, it's just not necessary. So, why should it be that as soon as I want to write about art, suddenly I have to use white people? Oh, come on, it's ridiculous. So, so I guess in my small way, I've tried to, broaden Asian American representation. But
that's a good thing to do. But let me just probe a little bit more. How has being Asian American affected your writing, or has it?
I actually don't think that I would be a writer if I weren't Asian American.
Really?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think that Being Asian American, especially the way that, because my family was here, we were not part of the 65 immigration wave. My parents came a lot earlier. We were very, very, very small minority. My parents are very Chinese, also that's another thing. So, we did not grow up in Chinatown, very, very isolated. I had a lot just to figure out, you know what I mean? It was just a lot to think about. And as you can see, it was a very deep subject, and it sustained me over now with I don't know, I've been writing 35, 40 years. I don't know how many years, a long time. And,
okay.
And, it's a big subject. And so, I don't know, would I have been as interested? I don't know. I don't know. I guess it's to say, I have kind of a live nerve that keeps me going. And I think it's inexhaustible, honestly. And so
you say exhaustible or inexhaustible?
Inexhaustible.
Oh, I'm glad, because I'll tell you, I read your books. Why? Because so many of your characters are Asian American. I mean, there's no question. That's the connection. That's the attraction. We have a question.
A lot of people read them who are not Asian American.
Oh, of course. I mean, if only Asian Americans read your stories, I mean, you wouldn't be so famous. But anyway, a question has come in that kind of relates to all of this. This person says, I have the names are not clear. I have followed your career since the early days of Asian American studies in 1970s. But I thought your first book was 1991. But nevertheless, what motivated and sustains your writing? How did your pursuing life as an author and researcher come about? I think we have an aspiring writer who's asking this question.
Well, everybody is different. I have to say that, in many ways, look, I love to write from very early. I mean, if you look at my third grade report card, it says she likes to write. I like to read. My mother was very literary. My grandfather was literary. We like to read in my family. And I can still see my mother just kind of hunched over. So it's just there's something to read. She kind of hunches over, all of her attention on it. So I come from a family where it was just, I don't want to say it's in my blood. I don't like that kind of essentialist talk. And I have 4 siblings, none of whom like to read. So it's not just a matter of blood, but for whatever reason, I was interested in books from the beginning. I read incessantly, and I did not really care whether I was represented or not. I loved them all. That was really interesting. And so I think the idea that I would have gone on to become a writer is just not that strange. You know what I mean? I mean, it was only strange in the sense that Asian Americans didn't become writers, I mean, in other words, except that there was that whole huge thing, which is that, my parents were immigrants, and also it was very much understood in the early days that somebody like we would never publish. You know what I mean? I mean, we're such a small minority. Who was going to buy a book? Who was interested? No one was interested. I didn't really care, so I guess, that was a funny thing is I went to graduate school. It was just a given that somebody like me would never be in a mainstream magazine, And so the fact that I've gone on and, I think all these people are like very bent out of shape that they have never been in the New Yorker, but I never expected that I was going to be a New Yorker. And then in the end, I was in the New Yorker. So, I mean, it was just something I like to do. And I have to say that, it's for me, it is fun. It is enlivening. I wrote a piece actually for the New York Times once about quitting writing and what life would be without writing. And to me, it's like life without music, I mean, for some people too, the idea of taking music out of their lives, it would kill them. And my life would be so impoverished without reading and writing. I mean, just impoverished, So if you would have said, oh, GISH, you don't have to work so hard, you can go every, have a beautiful lake, and say, oh, you can go sailing every day, you can go swimming every day. And I mean, I like to sail and swim, but I mean, enough's enough, I mean, I would be bored. Whereas I have to say, writing is never boring because it's hard. It's hard. It's always challenging. You never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to come next. You never know if you have another book in you. It's interesting.
We're going to get there. I want to ask you about that. Yeah, okay. I think you're probably already working on your next book, but we're not there yet. Wow, the passion that I can see and hear from what you're saying. Now I understand how you could leave Stanford Business School for Iowa. That is something that no good Chinese girl or Chinese daughter or son would do.
Chinese girl
would do. I mean, I remember reading that and I said, wow, she did it. I mean, you just made that break. I mean, pre-law, pre-med, business school, all, you know, certified, approved professions for Chinese girls and boys. I can see now from your passion. But how did that affect you in your family?
Well, of course, it was very difficult. I mean, my parents were incredibly against, you know, and
I can understand.
Yeah, of course. I'm a parent. I can understand.
Oh,
everybody says, well, if your children were interested in writing, what would you do? And I was sort of saying, well, you know, of course I can't. I wouldn't stop them, but I'd start saving now. I mean, it's, you know, of course you don't want your kids to do these things. Of course you worry. You know, and that's, and I have to say, you know, I'm doing great, but I mean, you know, their worry is well founded. I mean, you know, a career in the arts is really difficult. It's much more difficult than being a doctor. And I say that with all respect. Doctors are really smart. They work very hard. But we work just as hard, but with for a lot less security. I mean, it is really tough. That said, you know, you only live once. And, you know, if I look back, you know, it's like, of course, you know, I wish that writing were a more secure profession. That would be great. You know, when I just look at what I do all day, I just, you know, there isn't a bone in my body, you know, that wishes that I spent my day in the hospital. I mean, I just, there isn't, you know what I mean? It's like it's my job to go out to be interested in things, to, you know what I mean? To look into things that are mysterious and unknowable. It's my job to kind of think about them. I mean, you know, I mean, like I say, I wouldn't mind, you know, if, you know, there's a lot of things in the writing world that I would like to change. And I wish people would read more, you know, let's start there. You know, this is a study that comes out that actually the Yale study just came out. People who read, especially who read books, live much longer. It's very, very, very good for you. I'll send you the study, like a lot longer.
Well, we'll put it on our website.
Yeah. So I wish people would stop watching Netflix. I would wish they would, you know, it's a lot of things they would change. But I have to say that in a day-to-day kind of way, this is an amazing way to spend your life. You know what I mean? And so I feel very, very, very lucky. And yeah. And I think, you know, I used to when people used to say to me, like, well, how should I don't know if I want to be a writer or if I want to be a lawyer or whatever, you know, and I would sort of say, well, look at the perks. The biggest perk in my profession is that you get to deduct your books. You know, if you hear that and you think, oh my God, I can deduct my books, then you're in the right field. If your heart doesn't light up, you're in the wrong field, because this is the only perk we have.
Since
you know,
yours, but
the wrong thing.
Gish, did your parents live to see how successful you are?
Yes.
And what did they say then?
You know what? Of course they got their comeuppance. But you know what? The funny thing is, I think that for them, to the very end, especially my mother, I mean, I think that if she could still have waved a wand and turned me into the nice Chinese daughter that she had in mind, she would have done that. And, you know, that's a complicated thing, though, that has to do also with culture. Do you know what I mean? In other words, you know, she came here, by the time she came here, she was already in her 20s. You know, she had certain ideas about what a meaningful life was, about what children were, what children owed the family, you know, and I grew up in America, much more individualistic ideas. And I think that a lot of our ideas, you know, look, culture is a very deep thing. A lot of our ideas are tied, you know, to ideas about how one survives, right? And those ideas, then you have whole models that are built on that. It's very hard to convince somebody that actually you're in a different culture and the rules are really, really, really different. You know, I mean, you could tell her, but she can't really absorb them. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
I understand. Now, let's go a different way now. in reading your books, it becomes clear that you care a great deal about the issues of identity, especially what it means to be an American. And what resonated with me when I read Typical American was the implicit questions about who is typical and who is American. It resonated with me because I was asking myself these questions. Now, after writing 9 books, have you come to any conclusion about what it means to be an American?
I tell you, that very first book, which really was an attempt to redefine Americanness.
Yes.
And, to sort of say, well, what is an American? A person who, eats apple pie and grew up on a farm. And, the premise of that book is that, as soon as you ask yourself, like, what does it mean to be Chinese American, Iranian American, Irish American, or American? So, you know what I mean? So Americanness is, to be an American is to be kind of in a state of flux when it comes to identity. So I would say today I'm pretty comfortable with that idea. I mean, I don't worry that I'm not American. What else would I be? I do worry about the direction of America. That is absolutely the case. And but I would say that, another thing which, I look, America has a lot of problems. I think a couple of things. One thing is that I definitely feel I'm American. I'm proud to be American. And I wouldn't trade it. You know what I mean? There isn't a bone in my body there's nowhere else in the world I would want to live. This country needs a lot of help, however, but one thing that I have found is that, while no one is anxious to give you your Americanness, you have to take it and you have to make it. But if you take it and you make it, the answer is we're not going to stop you either, because you have right on your side and they know it, and they know it. And so, so there's a way in which I see that there is much work to be done, but also have a lot of confidence that you can do that work here. And that's very different. When you're laughing, we were talking about that line, no politics just make money. That very hyper realistic Chinese attitude, that's not because people don't care, about freedom of speech. I mean, look, nobody really wants to sit, nobody really wants to think one thing and have another come out of their mouth. I mean, I don't think anybody likes it, and nobody wants to, to have to do that just to, that's just a precondition for your being in the society. I don't think anybody really is too excited about that. That said, here in America, you raise a big fuss, and you know what? You can actually get some stuff done here. In China, as I don't need to tell you, you can raise a big fuss. I'm not sure how far you're going to get. And that's, these are two hugely different systems. And in that way, I'm Americans are shocked, people sort of say that, like no politics make money, but I feel like, what, if you lived in China for a while, you would understand why people say that. It's the realism there is because, power is very differently apportioned. And here, look, we don't have a lot of power, we have some. And in China, a lot less.
Well, we have questions coming in. Here's an interesting one. Do you feel the obligation to show the Chinese American history and Asian Americans' contributions to America when you're writing? Will you pay special attention to those issues? Do you have any kind of agenda when you start to write a new book? And how do you think yourself different from Chinese American writers such as Maxine Hong Kingston, Shang Wan, etc.?
Oh my goodness.
There's a lot of questions.
I was going to say, do we have another 4 hours? Okay. So, let me just sort of say that I actually feel some responsibility, but I don't feel responsibility to present all of Asian American history. Definitely not. So how could I? There's too much of it. And, and there are parts of it that I feel that other writers are just much more equipped to present. So when it comes to, the whole California experience, why would I write about that? I grew up on the East Coast. You know what I mean? I know a lot about the New York experience. I know a lot about it. I don't know anything about the California experience. Why would I write about that when there's so many wonderful California writers? Do you know what I mean? And this is not because, it's just because, especially since, what I have to say has not been said by anybody else. That's another thing, and that's just a very realistic thing. If something just hasn't been said, like I wrote about this Chinese American girl turning Jewish, right? And all these people say like, oh my God, I know so many people. Well, because they grew up in New York and they're like, actually most people in New York are a little bit Jewish, you know what I mean? Because of the culture there. And so nobody had written that. So why would I write about the California experience when in fact I had lived this experience and no one had written about it? That's not because I'm trying to represent anything. It's just because it is my experience and it's funny. And no one's written about it. And it very much pertains also on the way that we construct America. I don't feel any obligation to highlight, to showcase the contributions of Asian Americans. I feel like that's for the Museum of Chinese America to do. They're doing a great job. They don't need me to do it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so I'm not trying to whitewash or showcase. And, it's like I say, I think I support other people as they do it. You know what I mean? I support the Museum of Chinese America, but I don't have to do it myself. I am very, very, very different than some of the writers you talked about. I love Maxine. I did a blurb. She's just been included in the Library of America. I did a blurb. I have to say, we had a wonderful interview that we did for the 92nd Street Y. And if you're interested in the subject, you should definitely go. At the end of it, especially, Maxine opened up in a very, very, very special way. I have to say that I do think that interview is one for the history books. And so, if you're interested in the subject, I would go to the 92nd Street Y, and listen to that interview. But we're very different. She's a different generation. She's from the West Coast. And we're just and Hawaii, very, very, very different. I'm from the East Coast. And very importantly, I'm a whole nother generation. She used to say that she cried so that I could laugh. I don't know that that's exactly true. I mean, in other words, my father's I just come from a funny family. My father was very funny. I'm just funny. My husband will tell you in the middle of the night, I'm laughing in my sleep. I am just funny. So I don't know if that's exactly true. But it is true that maybe that, because she had broken the ground. I mean, I broke a lot of ground too, but not, it's not as hard as that very, she's the first one through. I mean, it is really exhausting. And so I think that maybe there's some of that there too. In any case, and I will say, I think that I had to write against Maxine Hawkins in the sense that I had to write whatever it is that I had to say, it had to be something that she hadn't already done. Do you know what I mean? Like I couldn't just be Maxine Hunkingston too, right? Which I'm not, obviously, but in my days, it was up to me to resist the anxiety. I guess it's some anxiety of influence. I tried to not to be her. I don't think that she's offended or anything like that. She once said that she wrote in an interview that I said I wanted to kill her. That's just because that's the term that Harold Bloom had used in his book, Anxiety of Influence. And I sort of said, well, I think I had some anxiety of influence, I guess at some level, as a younger writer, I probably felt that I had to kill her. And when I met her, she said, I read in an interview that you wanted to kill me. It's so terrible. Oh, but nobody would want to kill Maxine Hunkingston. She's the most wonderful person on earth. Are you kidding? I definitely do not want to kill her.
Here's another question that's kind of different. This question is about what differences you see when it comes to Chinese Asian American literature in terms of how class privilege is portrayed. And then this person goes on to say that, I don't know if it's correct or not, I'm not sure, your work dwells primarily on middle to upper middle class Chinese Americans.
Well, let me just sort of say that, I don't know, if you look at my new collection, I think there's a lot of people who are not so middle class American, and so I don't know that that's accurate, honestly. And again, this is again the representation thing. I mean, I write about. I tend to write about what's pretty near at hand, but I don't think. I mean, honestly, no. A lot of these people are not so middle class. Actually, would be my observation.
Um, you know, I think we've talked a lot about Asian Americans for obvious reasons. Asian Americans now have been caught in the middle of this deteriorating relationship. Mm. Have you seen this, and have you alluded to this or written about this in your books, or do you intend to?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, of course, the deteriorating relationship is just the last couple of years, right? Yes. I mean, you know, so well, I have.
It's U.S.-China relations have gone up and down, but in most recent years, it really has gone from bad to worse.
Yes. So I haven't really written about just how bad things are now, although I think that you can get that, you know. So the most recent of my stories, Detective Dog, which was published just last year, and written just shortly before that, you know, you could definitely see that people are caught between, you know. So, you know, Betty Koo was definitely caught in the middle. And you can see how it plays out in her family. Do you know what I mean? So you can sort of see that the tensions in Hong Kong, you know, she says, you know, her mother says, you know, no politics, just make money. But the younger generation are not with that program. So you can really see how they're, you know what I mean? So the tensions with, you know, between China and Hong Kong are now tensions in their family. Do you know what I mean? And she has a son walk out. He thinks, you know what I mean? He has a lot of very hard things to say to his parents. Obviously, they're in the middle, you know, middle. I think that as a writer also, I definitely feel caught in the middle. I'm in a general kind of way, you know, I'm not anxious to make trouble. I mean, I'm not, you know, I think I have a lot of sympathy for China that as having a very different givens, you know, the size of the population, the geography, you know, just, you know, the natural resources and the culture. You know, so to me, I have never been somebody who thought that, oh, let's go, you know, let's establish a democracy in China. I've never really thought this was a very realistic idea. And I certainly thought it was very arrogant to the West to think that they could just go in and obviously our system is superior and they should do that. That said, at this point, you know, even somebody with me who was really kind of agnostic on the question, on some of these questions, we have to take a stand. I mean, it's because China has gotten so extreme. So an example of this is that, you know, I had a cousin write a coffee table book, you know, about Chinese culture. Very, very beautiful. She is Taiwanese. I first met her, my cousin, in Taiwan, you know, many, many years ago. The book was originally published in Taiwan. Now they're coming out with the US edition. So the US edition was being printed on the mainland, not even published on the mainland, but printed on the mainland. And in order to have it printed on the mainland, they wanted me to take the word Taiwan out. And I just sort of said, you know, that's when you have to choose. And I just sort of said, you know what? I'm American. I can't take the word Taiwan out. You know, I mean, I met her in Taiwan. You know, she lives in Taiwan. This book was published in Taiwan. I cannot act like there is no place called Taiwan. I just can't do it. You know what I mean? And I think, frankly, I think it is unreasonable to ask that, you know what I mean, to insist that because a book is, you know, if they want to protect the reading public in China and sort of say they don't want them exposed to this, that, the other thing, that's their business, you know. But I think to ask, I mean, I don't agree with it, but, you know, I don't feel it's for me to say, but to say that a book cannot be printed on the mainland because it has the word Taiwan in it. Well, like I say, of course I pulled the preface. Do you know what I mean? Because, you know, I feel like they put me in a position where I just don't have a choice. So we are kind of caught in the middle, even though, you know, this preface, I'm just doing a favor for my cousin. You know what I mean? The preface, this is not a big political statement or anything like that. It was just like my cousin was writing her book, and would I write a preface? And the answer is, you're my cousin, of course. You know what I mean? I don't, you know what I mean? It's just not like I'm, you know, I'm not writing for the New York Times or something, you know what I mean? So, you know, I think that they're making things quite difficult, and it's very hard. I'm sure you've been in this position a million times, but at a certain point, even if you're very sympathetic to their having cultural differences, at a certain point, you have to sort of, you are forced to kind of choose, even though you would really rather not.
Well, we're coming to a time when we have to close, but I have to ask you, what is next for you?
I am writing a new book, but Julia, I'm going to tell you that I'm not going to say anything about it.
Of course, I know that I don't mean for you to tell us about what you're writing, because that would be letting the cat out of the bag. But my other question is, and also before you leave, you must answer the question from this young aspiring writer who wants what is your advice to an aspiring author who wants to be published? But that you can leave at the end. It's for everybody who wants to know your secret. But I don't think there is a book yet written, even though you have so much critical acclaim, yet devoted to GISH Jen's life or works. Is there anything in the works on that?
Well, actually, there is a book. It's called Understanding GISH Jen.
Where is it? I couldn't find it.
University of North Carolina Press, maybe. It's written by a professor named Jennifer Ho.
Really?
Yep. So she has.
I guess I'm a bad researcher.
No. But yes, there is a book called Understanding GISH Jen, and I know she just wrote. They're bringing it out again, reissuing it in paperback.
When was it published?
I'm going to say it's either University of North Carolina Press. But if that's inaccurate, please forgive me. But I'm 90% sure that's correct. And
we're going to go find it.
And I just know because she's working on a new preface, and she contacted me about that. So yes, so there is such a book, and there's been a lot of ink spilled on me. I try not to read it because I don't want to be made self-conscious. You know what I mean? So self-consciousness is the writer's great enemy. But I would say that to your aspiring writer. I have no secret. There is no secret, right? But I will say that one thing that I have done throughout my career, which I do think is extremely helpful, is that before I start to write, I make like a little mental icon of all the people who would have something to say about my book, and I take that little icon and I take it and I drag it and I drop it into the hall. So that would include my mother, my editor, certain critics, people who were in workshops with me who I felt never got my work. I take all those people, I put them out in the hall until really it's just me and what do I think. And I do think that that's actually a very useful exercise, because in the end, first of all, no one knows if you can publish or not publish, but I can tell you this whole enterprise is very difficult. And there is absolutely no sense in giving up a paying job and a normal life to do this unless you are saying exactly what you think. And that is the payoff, and that is the reward, I guess authenticity, you get to be yourself. You do not have one thing in your mind and another thing coming out of your mouth. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like what you think is what comes out of your mouth. That is actually a great joy, a great privilege. And if you don't have that, then you're in the wrong business. Well,
I think on that note, thank you, Gish.
It's my pleasure.
Let us hope that maybe in less than 10 years, we'll have you back for another program. Maybe when your next book is out.
That would be lovely, lovely, lovely. And Julia, I look forward to being able to do it, in China. I do.
We all look forward to that.
Well, I hope. Anyway,
we all hope. We all hope.
Yeah. More power to you.
And on that note, thank you again. And good night, everyone.
Good night.